I move the Sinn Féin motion, and I'm sharing time with colleagues. I have 5 minutes. The motion seeks to do a number of important things. In the first instance, it seeks to extend the moratorium on electricity and gas disconnections to all customers, and from now until the end of the fuel allowance season, so late March, early April. A ban on disconnections is currently in place, but it is far too limited. It applies for self-identified and registered medically vulnerable bill pay customers. That's a subset, self-identified, of a subset, registered, of a subset, medically vulnerable, of a subset, bill pay. It was introduced on the 1st of October and runs until the end of March. It is far too limited in its scope. For other bill pay customers, the ban on disconnection kicks in from the 1st of December and runs to the end of February. That's an extremely limited 3-month ban at a time when 581,000 people are living below the poverty line, according to EAPA in Ireland, when up to 43%, a record but conservative estimate, are at risk or living in energy poverty, according to the ESRI, when the government's budget is failing to keep pace with the cost of living, according to the Vincenzo Research Centre, and when energy suppliers are disconnecting about 170 domestic gas and electricity customers each and every month. And as for pay-as-you-go customers, there is no ban on disconnections. This is despite the Taoiseach's public comments, which gave rise to headlines such as Taoiseach confirms pay-as-you-go utility customers will not be disconnected if unable to top up, or Taoiseach no disconnections of pay-as-you-go energy users this winter, or pay-as-you-go energy customers will not be disconnected this winter, Taoiseach. Of course, in the days and weeks that followed those statements, it's now quite clear that the Taoiseach has no intention of delivering on that commitment. Instead, we're told there's €10 extra emergency credit. It's up to €20 now. Isn't that enough? We're told there's MABs or St Vincent de Paul, charity in other words. That is not the answer. Or the community welfare officer. This in itself shows just how out of touch this government and its ministers are. Exceptional needs claims in the first 9 months of this year, Minister, are up 37%, an amount of 66,000 in number. Claims are processed in weeks or months, not hours or even days. That is most certainly not the answer. Minister Ryan, we were told, was meeting with all the energy suppliers and with the CRU in some indication that we would have movement. Instead, you, Minister, came away from those meetings and with a straight face went on national radio to tell us that pay-as-you-go is actually good for people. Nothing about the rip-off tariffs that they're on, nothing about the rip-off standing charges being applied, nothing about the amount of medically vulnerable people who are actually on pay-as-you-go meters and should be on bill pay, and most certainly nothing about the need to extend the exact same protections and support to pay-as-you-go customers as we have for bill pay customers. We set it out in our motion. It can be done and it should be done through the extending of the so-called friendly credit. That should happen. It should happen immediately. The risk of disconnection from gas and electricity should be lifted off families. It's a matter of the values that we as a country hold in this republic. Our motion also extends and calls for legislation to be introduced to give the CRU powers to regulate standing charges on energy bills. We further call for the government to reduce and cap the price of electricity bills at summer 2021 rates, and call for the introduction of a windfall and a solidarity tax to be introduced on the excess profits of energy companies. Minister, this is a time of extreme crisis, an energy crisis, a cost of living crisis. The state needs to stretch itself. What this government has done is taken the recommendations at face value from the CRU and done nothing with them. They should have been stress tested. They should have been challenged. That organisation doesn't hold up well in the current climate. They should have been challenged and they should have been extended. Sinn Féin have a suite of proposals, and Minister, you need to take them and implement them.
And workers and families, Minister, are facing a cost of living crisis. They're seeing mountain energy bills, they're seeing massive strain being put on their household finances, and many of them are facing sleepless nights. Many of them are facing stress at the thought of how they can keep on top of mountain bills, how they can heat their homes and keep the lights on as we approach winter. And the Government has refused the opportunity to provide certainty to households with a cut and a cap on electricity bills over the winter months, a mistake in my view that exposes families to high bills and further price hikes. At the same time, we know that households now face the threat of disconnections, with many are already effectively self-disconnecting. The Government's plan to introduce a disconnection ban from December to February falls short, with many requiring protection and support right here, right now, Minister. The households who are using prepaid meters are particularly vulnerable and without greater security of direct debit contracts with their energy suppliers. So once the €20 emergency credit runs out, they're disconnected by default, and many of them are already self-disconnecting. They're rationing their use of energy with or without the choice, turning down heating or off despite the cold that is outside and inside, avoiding the use of essential appliances, skipping warm meals or showers, all to the detriment of their physical and mental health. That's what's happening in the real world. In recent weeks and months, we have spoken and heard a lot about our national energy security, but we're also facing a crisis in household energy security, the very ability of families to keep warm and have the basic essentials. We need to deliver certainty for those families who use prepay meters. This affects 378,000 households across the state, and many of them in my own county of Donegal. And it's simply not good enough from government to wash their hands of this with no plan to protect those families and individuals from disconnection. Earlier today, we had heard the Taoiseach say allowing these individuals to build up debt isn't the answer. So what is the government's answer? Is it for them to turn off the gas, to turn off the light and leave them in the dark? Because that is what you have done. Sinn Féin, for our part, will continue to stand up for ordinary workers and families, especially during the cost of living crisis when so many families feel insecurity and massive financial pressure. So I'm calling on all Dáil deputies to support this motion brought forward by Deputy O'Rourke, and calling on you, Minister, and the Government to finally act to put in place a disconnections ban from now until the end of March, and ensuring those households on prepaid meters do not suffer from disconnection this winter.
Thank you. Minister, this is about choices. It's as simple as that. When this country hit a financial crisis, the government parties bailed out the banks and didn't give a damn about the cost. This winter, this government has a choice whether they bail out ordinary working families and pensioners, people who are trying to get through this winter. So the choice is with you, and you've decided to not support ordinary people. And that is the fundamental difference between this government and Sinn Féin. We say what we do, we support ordinary families, we support ordinary people, and when you listen to the Taoiseach coming here 2 weeks ago and give a commitment to people, he's the Taoiseach of this country, and he gave a commitment on the Dáil that no one would be disconnected and that prepaid customers would be looked after. Well, Minister, the Taoiseach is getting that commitment. Are you going to double down on that now and confirm that commitment is there? Because for the almost 400,000 families and homes affected, they want clarity. They want to know that the government is there to support them. And when you listen to some of the comments from the government ministers and backbench TDs about we can't write a blank cheque. You can write a blank cheque when you sued a G, when you had a choice. And that's what there is no blank cheque here. What we have is a costed proposal that will support ordinary people, support the people who need it the most. This government is relying on charities to do the work the government should be doing. There are people on pay-as-you-go. They're paying some of the highest tariffs, and prepaid customers must have a charge of €100. Right? So where is the equality? Where is the support for ordinary families? Minister, You're the Minister in charge. You need to show leadership and stand up now, and we're asking you that tonight.
The list here has Denise Mitchell. Yeah. Okay.
Good last count, Carla. Minister, we're bringing this motion because workers and families need action on the cost of living crisis, and they need it now. The government's proposals was half-hearted yet again, and it didn't go far enough. Everyone needs to be protected from disconnections for the cold winter we are facing into. Sinn Féin wants this ban on disconnections to happen immediately and to run until March, because people cannot wait. People are already pinned to their collars trying to afford rents and food, and that's before their energy bills arrive. Families struggled to afford their last energy bill, and most of these bills didn't include the most recent shameful hikes that energy providers were allowed to add on. When the next round of energy bills start to arrive with these disgraceful increases, I can tell you now, Minister, that people will be left wondering how the hell are they going to pay them. A disconnection ban from December will be too little, too late to support these people. Now, we have a solution, and that's to bring in an immediate ban for everybody now. But yet again, the government is dragging its heels. Your disconnection ban will do nothing to help the ordinary, hard-working families that I represent, because it will be too late. Your disconnection ban will do little to support people on prepay meters who will be disconnected once their €20 emergency credit runs out. People on prepay meters will be disconnected by default. Now, Minister, nobody chooses to go without electricity and heat in the depth of winter. People need to heat their homes, they need to boil their kettles, they need to cook their food, and they need to keep lights on while their children do their homework. Your half-hearted attempt at banning disconnections will not work, because it will be far, far too late. Minister, you need to take action, and you need to take it now.
Chair, and I'd like to thank my colleague Darren O'Rourke for tabling this very important motion today. Minister, as you know, I represent one of those constituencies that has a larger than average percentage of households on low or very modest incomes. I represent large urban areas where people are in poorly paid employment, in precarious employment and part-time employment, and many of those people actually don't get to choose the type of energy supply that they have, because they live predominantly in the private rental sector. That means they don't get to choose to control whether or not they pay with prepay meters or with a bill. And they're also the same people who are more likely to be at risk of poverty, more likely to be at risk of energy poverty, and least able to absorb the significant increased costs that you're well aware of, whether that's the cost of energy, of food, of fuel, or indeed of rent. And I often wonder, when government ministers, many of whom don't have a direct experience of the kind of reality that families such as the ones I'm speaking of deal with day to day, when they sit down and make laws and devise schemes, are they fully cognizant of the impact of the exclusions that are included? And that's why this is such an important motion, because the idea that the government has designed a scheme that effectively ignores the needs of almost 400,000 households, some of the most vulnerable households to poverty and energy poverty, is just remarkable. It's also no surprise, of course, that travellers are completely excluded from the measures that the government has effectively taken today, because of the informal arrangements on many traveller-specific accommodation sites, and they're not able to avail of the discounts and the protections on the bans, those that most need it. So, Minister, I'm really urging you, put party politics to one side and just listen carefully to what many members will say, but more importantly, really think about the people who aren't being protected by the measures that you've introduced today, and go back to the drawing board, not only supporting our motion, but to revise your own measures to ensure particularly those families that need it the most get the protection. This week alone, I've dealt with 2 single parents, both in precarious part-time employment, both desperately trying to do right by their children, and both who have experienced the threat of disconnection. Please don't let those families down. Please support this motion.
Louise O'Reilly.
Last count Corla, and I want to thank my colleague Chocta Darren O'Rourke not just for this motion, which is extremely important, but for all of the work that he is doing. And Minister, the Taoiseach, I believe, spoke directly to the 378,000 people who are on prepay meters, and he told them that they wouldn't be cut off. But then your colleague, Junior Minister O'Brien, on television at the weekend told people that maybe they can go to MABS, or they can go to the St Vincent de Paul, or they can go to the community welfare officer. And I think he genuinely said it like as if this would be news to people who live on low incomes or on fixed incomes. But those people have already exhausted, in many cases, many of the options that are available to them, and they don't have weeks to wait for the community welfare officer to respond to them. And it's unfair, Minister, to say to people who are afraid that they are going to be cold this week, not in December, this week, they are afraid they are going to be cold this week. It is cruel and it is unfair to say to those people, you won't be cut off, and then to be found wanting when the mechanism for ensuring that is requested of you. So, Minister, I would urge you to support this motion, to think about people who are worried now, who are worried today, who will have to explain to their children why they cannot turn on the lights today. There is a real and genuine need to protect people from this energy crisis, and those people who are on prepay meters are among some of the most vulnerable in the state. And when you make your remarks, Minister, I would encourage you to talk directly to them, and not to give them a false hope, but to speak directly to them as to what it is that you and your government propose to do to keep the lights on, so that their kids can do their homework, so that they can wash their clothes, and they can do all of the things that people should be able to take for granted. Minister, I would urge you to support this motion. That is the kindest thing you can do. It's the most practical thing you can do, and it speaks directly to those people who are depending on you to take action.
Dr. Matt Carthy.
I want to read into the record of the Dáil a text message that I received yesterday. It said, well, Matt, can you bring it up in the Dáil when they are discussing the pay-as-you-go meters? Is that the emergency credit with Electric Ireland is only €5, which comes off when you put another voucher in. It takes the €5 and cuts off after the €5 credit is used up again. So if we don't have at least €10, we have no electricity, because you can only put €10 in is the lowest. Imagine, Minister, if the inability to be able to source €10 that you simply don't have towards the end of the week was the difference as to whether or not you could make a meal for your family, or whether or not you could put on a wash, or whether or not you could even switch on a light, never mind a television or anything else that may be considered a luxury by this government. And we have to ask ourselves, how have we come to the point where your government and ministers, particularly from the Green Party, but aided and abetted, of course, from your colleagues, are willing with a straight face to say that the answer to this couple and others is that they should go to MABS, go to their community welfare officer, or go to a local charity. This is a working couple. This woman who texted me yesterday, both her and her husband work. Now, Minister, the first thing you need to take responsibility for is the actions and the inactions of your government in ensuring that we have this electricity crisis in the first place. There are international factors, of course, but next Tuesday will mark the one-year anniversary from the issuance of a joint statement of just 9 EU member states that opposed the decoupling of gas and electricity prices. To your shame, Minister, your signature was on that letter. And then you had the audacity to come before us on several occasions and say we can't take action at a domestic level because it has to happen at an EU level, even though you've been part of the problem in terms of securing EU support for decoupling and for price caps and for windfall taxes on the energy companies. This motion, I commend Darren O'Rourke for bringing it forward, provides you with the route to change course. I urge you, Minister, and your Cabinet colleagues to take the route as it's offered and provide those workers and families who desperately need it with a break.
House had a monopoly on caring. Surely, if this government cared, the one most basic thing it would do is ensure that a ban on disconnections is introduced for every household in the state as a very basic in relation to showing that this government cares as people face into an unprecedented winter in many cases. And I find it quite incredible that in the midst of one of the greatest energy crises that many of us will have seen and lived through, that it is up to the opposition to bring forward a motion to seek action from government for basic protections for households. And I say basic because we are talking about households having electricity and households having heating. The asks in our motion here this evening are the difference between being able to turn on the lights or to be in the dark, the difference between being able to turn on the heating or being cold in your own home. Earlier this month, and it has been referenced, the Taoiseach committed that the government will not allow people on pay-as-you-go energy meters to be disconnected over the winter. A big commitment, a welcome commitment, but no action from government to date to actually make that happen. They are just words. The planned ban on disconnection from the 1st of December is too late. We've already seen over 1,000 domestic disconnections in the first half of this year alone, and that's before we even come to the winter period and to the worst that is to come in relation to the energy crisis. And the message from government, despite all of that, is to wait. And I have to make this point, and I've made it many times. The solution is not additional needs payments through the Department of Social Protection. That is an assistance. It is one assistance for people, and you may get it, you may not get it. Last month, I got a reply from the department to tell me that 95% of additional needs payments applications were being finalised within 5 to 8 weeks. Now, can you imagine waiting 2 months if you have a utility bill, 2 months for a payment from the Department of Social Protection, and only now is recruitment being looked at? Community welfare officers are being centralised. You cannot walk in as you could before. I raised the need to put the application form online in July. That's still being looked at by the department. The motion here before us is really important, and you should accept it and you should implement the proposals in it.
Dr. Sean Crowe.
I don't think it should come as any surprise or shock to anyone to hear that every price hike, every price increase that comes from energy companies puts more and more pressure on struggling households. I think surely we can all agree in the House on that. You believe, Minister, that your proposals that you're putting forward is sufficient, and I suppose the argument that we're putting forward from this side of the House is that it's not, and you're not doing enough. Many workers and their families are left wondering how they're going to afford the bills that keep coming into their house. And if you want to go out to my area, like other TDs will talk about their own constituency, but I can bring you out to shopping centres in my area, and there's elderly people there tonight sitting in the shopping centre because they can't afford to put the heating on in their own home. And that's happening now, not in December. You're talking about disconnections on December or February. The weather in Ireland doesn't get warmer in February, the end of February, We're arguing that it, at least extend it to March. Have a look at that, Minister, just show some heart to those families that are out there. But the other big issue is that we're talking about people possibly disconnected. And we need to look at ways of stopping those people being disconnected. and it's, you know, the simple measures that you can extend this for another month. That would have a huge impact on many families. I think households do need assurances, and I suppose again that was the difference between ourselves and government in relation to the budget. We were arguing that there needs to be energy assurances given to people. You argued that this route is going to be better. There's people going to be getting some increases, social welfare and so on, but is it going to be enough, Minister? And I would argue that it's not, and it's ordinary families, and it's probably not the whole population, but there's a sizable amount of people that are vulnerable, and they're going to be more vulnerable as these prices increase. So I'm asking again, Minister, to think on your position when the vote comes. Thank you.
Motion forward. I suppose the main focus is in relation to the prepaid customers, and I don't actually know if government, including yourself, Minister, really understand what those prepaid customers, the situation that they're in. The vast majority of people, first of all, I think that whole prepay system is a total scam, because most people are sort of nearly made to go into this if they've fallen into arrears and they're told that this is be a better way of managing your budget and your money, and it just is not. And we're going to have children, and I really want to focus on that in relation to children, because we are going to have children not just going hungry but going cold, going into school the following day, having had, not adequate sleep, not adequate supports in terms of trying to get homework done, in terms of adequate food. And, we have on occasion talk about child poverty in the Dáil, and everybody seems to get up and say it's something that they want to eradicate, but yet we continuously have systems that continuously fail children. And I think that really goes to the heart of this issue, that we are continuously failing children. They're some of the most vulnerable in our society in terms of not having necessarily a voice for themselves, and I think it's really, really important that the issue of the prepay customers is dealt with. It's totally and utterly unfair to exclude people just because they're in a situation where they're on a prepay meter system, which, as I said in the first place, I don't understand how anybody thinks that's a good system, and I don't think people should be encouraged into it at all. I want to very briefly mention as well this exceptional needs payment, because I really am so sick of hearing this from government and even advertisements about it. I honestly can't think of one person that has come into our office that has applied for this payment that has received it in the last few months. If you're on any sort of an income, whether that's a very low income, you just seem to be totally and utterly disqualified from it, apart from the fact that there's huge waiting lists, and it's something like, what I think Deputy Cran said, something like 5 to 9 weeks, which is totally inadequate for an emergency payment. The whole idea of it being an emergency is that you can't wait for it, but people aren't qualifying for it, and I really think that is not the solution here, and that particularly annoys me. Sorry, Les Concarna. Thanks.
Dr. Boris Quinlivan is the finest speaker.
Minister, I'm just disappointed Minister Ryan left, because there's an issue I want to raise with him. I've raised it with yourself, and I've raised it a number of occasions, and my colleagues have referred to it as well, as the Community Welfare Officer and the Exceptional Needs Payment, which simply is not working. You can't put on a TV programme, a radio programme or whatever, or in Dáil debates here where government ministers, TDs, senators or whatever are talking about, if you're stuck with a bill, go to the Community Welfare Officer for an Exceptional Needs Payment. Community Welfare Officer in my local area is a 10-week wait. The staff there are working really hard, but there's a 10-week wait for it. Across the state, in the PQ I got back from the Minister, in the first 4 months of this year, 1,001 people got payments towards their household bills and their heat, which included heating bills. So it's simply not working. It's simply not an option for most people. Minister, we'll go back to the motion, and I want to commend my colleague Deputy O'Rourke for this motion and for all the work he's done on this issue over the last number of months, particularly, but since he was appointed as our spokesperson. I want to just commend people who are helping people who are in huge stress, and I don't think the government are realising the stress that many people are under, and I don't think they realise the fear that many people are under. My local community centre stays open later. Dinners don't finish till 5 o'clock because they can sit in the room because the heating is on. and they don't want to go home because they don't want to heat up their own homes. They're afraid of the bill. And Minister, we haven't hit the peak of winter yet, so people are really, really concerned. Over the last 18 months, there's been a litany of price hikes announced by the energy companies. The hikes, including the latest tranche, have put immense pressure, as I said, on households up and down the country. Families are having to make unenviable choices when it comes to how to spend the money. We are in a cost of living crisis, no doubt about that, but there is scope for the government and a need for the government to intervene and protect our citizens. And I'm urging the government to take the steps outlined during the debate and the motion sponsored by my colleague Deputy O'Rourke to protect households from electricity and gas disconnections this winter. Minister, there's a serious worry out there from people, especially people who live in flat complexes, people who are renting privately, people on pay-to-go meters, that there is no clarity as to what's going to happen. Are they going to be disconnected or what? And the choices that we'll have to make, you know, what do you do? Like, you were disconnected, you just can't cook your food, you can't, you know, but Minister, you have to do something.
Deputies Quirk, Pauline Tully and Darren O'Rourke have 2.5, 2.5 and 5 minutes in that order.
Thank you.
Is that agreed?
Agreed. I'd like to thank my colleague Darren O'Rourke for bringing this motion. Minister, we have known for a long time the struggles that some households are facing when it comes to energy costs. That situation is now worse than ever, given the cost of living crisis and the particular crisis that families and households face as electricity and gas prices continue to rise. Since the pandemic, families have had to worry about illness, temporary loss of jobs, financial worries and putting food on the table. Now they face a new pandemic in energy, with costs spiralling out of control, so much so that they choose whether to sit in darkness or have a meal on the table or heat the house. Government should also take into account the stress our school children will go through if their homes get disconnected, as the winter months come in and they may have 2 to 3 hours of homework. We in Sinn Féin are calling for a ban on disconnections to start immediately and run to the end of March for all customers, not just medically vulnerable customers. Households need support during this difficult time, not the threat being left in the cold and dark hanging over them. A ban on disconnections gives a household time to come to an arrangement with their supplier. Our motion would also give certainty to the many people who use prepay electricity meters. Once their €20 emergency credit runs out, prepay customers are disconnected. The government still has no plan to protect these households. Our motion would ensure prepay meter customers get the same protection from electricity and gas disconnections. This is about fairness and giving certainty to people. The government needs to ensure that all households are protected from disconnections. I was going to call on all TDs to support this motion, but instead the government took the easy way out of not opposing the motion, which doesn't necessarily mean supporting the motion. We in Sinn Féin will stand up for ordinary workers and families to ensure no family will be in the dark or in the cold this winter. Thank you.
So I would like to commend my colleague Darren O'Rourke for introducing this motion here today. We have 712 domestic electricity and 309 domestic gas disconnections in the first half of this year. I think something needs to be done immediately. I mean, the government's rejection of the Sinn Féin proposal to reduce and cap electricity prices at pre-crisis levels was a big mistake. It leaves hard-pressed households exposed to additional hikes and to the prospect of disconnection. And as families face a long winter, they worry that they won't be able to afford to keep the lights on. I mean, the government also delayed by 12 months the second reading of the Electricity Regulation Amendment or Prohibition of Winter Disconnections Bill 2021, which was introduced by Sinn Féin. And this sought to extend the moratorium on disconnections to run over the entire fuel allowance season. I think the government should rethink these proposals and not simply reject them because Sinn Féin have proposed them. I mean, what's important is that people are protected now. Households across my constituency of Cavan Monaghan and across all constituencies indeed are facing enormous energy bills this winter, and they've been hit by price hike after price hike over the last 18 months and are anxious about whether they can keep on top of these escalating bills. So it is vital that people are protected now, that they are given certainty that their bills will be affordable, and that they will have an assurance that they will not face disconnection from electricity and gas this winter. Introducing measures in December will be too late for many. This needs to happen now and continue until the end of March. And the protection must also be extended to the 378,000 customers across the state who use pay-as-you-go meters. I mean, currently, when their emergency credit runs out, prepay customers are disconnected by default. But the government still has no real plan to protect these households, and it's not good enough. Like, we need to ensure prepay meter customers get the same protection from electricity and gas connections, or at the very least, friendly credit on prepay meters needs to be extended. To reiterate, this is an unparalleled crisis. The government needs to ensure that all households are protected from disconnection. So once again, I would like to commend Deputy O'Rourke for the work he has done to bring this motion to the floor today, and I'd urge everyone to support it.
Thank you, Deputy. Yes.
Thank you, Darren, for splitting your time with me and also for bringing this motion to the House. And what I'd say, Minister, is unless this government is completely disconnected, they know the fear and the anxiety that people have in their homes this winter in just trying to keep the lights on and trying to keep the electricity there. A couple of things that you said around the low take-up of the hardship funds. I do think that needs to be investigated, because that's a complete mismatch between the anxiety and the stress that people are undergoing and then taking up on those funds. Is it that those funds, people aren't aware of them? Now, I know many people who find themselves in the situation that they find themselves now in, being unable to pay their bills, are people who have never ever found themselves in that situation before. So I would ask that something be done there to communicate that to people, that there is a hardship fund there under MABs and that people need to use it, and we need to see if there are blockages there in the way. You also say that no customer should stay on a pay-as-you-go meter. So that the message that you're sending out from here tonight is that people can easily transfer from a pay-as-you-go meter to a bill pay situation. And I think people will welcome that as well. But again, we need to make sure that there's no blockages there. As was said earlier, there's enormous profits being made by energy companies. That's money that's coming directly out of the people who are suffering most in this community.
And thanks to everyone who contributed to the debate. I have to say, Minister and Junior Minister and Senior Minister before you who contributed on behalf of the Government, I would say you filled your time and you talked about everything but the issue at hand here, and particularly in relation to the clear call for the extension of the disconnection ban to all customers from now until the end of March. There was no commitment from government to do that, and the commitment to provide a solution for pay-as-you-go customers, that solution being to ensure that they had the exact same protections as bill pay customers. You didn't provide a solution for them, and I think I'm right in saying, and it would be important to clarify, that that facility to transfer onto a bill pay is limited only to vulnerable customers. And again, I said before that that's a subset of a subset of a subset of a subset. That, of course, should be made available. That provision should be made available to all customers. I have to say, in not opposing this motion but not supporting it, it amounts to a shameful abandonment of those people who are in deep need of support from this government. And I have to ask the question, because for me, this is not a big ask. This is not a big ask to extend the fundamental principle in the middle of a crisis that we will not, in this republic, not disconnect people from heat and light this winter. I just think it shouldn't be a challenge. It shouldn't be a challenge, and it's a reflection of a failure of government, a failure of government to support people in need. The arguments, I have to say, in a number of cases, this idea that pay-as-you-go is good for some people, it helps them manage their bills, it's actually offensive. It's offensive. It completely misses the point, because we know that people are, for want of a better term, self-disconnecting. We know people are facing real financial hardship, but they're not being supported. In fact, this government is pretending that they don't exist. That, in effect, is what they're doing. And in your contribution to this debate tonight, that is the sum total of your contribution. At the root of all of this is I think, an argument of moral hazard, that there is a cohort of people here that you cannot extend the same protection to, because, sure, they couldn't manage their affairs. And I think that's insulting, that's offensive, and that's implied by the fact that you will not extend the same protections to that cohort of people as you have to everybody else. So I would, put that on the record. I think people can see through it, Minister. There is an opportunity to address it. We've spelled it out. Extend the friendly credit. Extend the friendly credit. Show those people that you will support them over this winter, because you don't even count the people who are so-called self-disconnecting. You're not counting those people. They're being completely disregarded and explained away that it's good for them to manage their own accounts. They need to be supported. They deserve the exact same protections as the rest of us. Gormagat.
Now I must put the question, and the question is that the debate. Just 1 second now. The question is, the motion be agreed. Is the motion agreed? No disagreement. No dissenting voices. Motion agreed.